Zach is back with another attack, and you can count on that. Well, I know he's ugly and he's fat, but hit subscribe and we'll work on that. Cause now it's time for my own show. It's Zach to the future, yo.
What's up, YouTube? Zach's back with another attack, and today, for another episode of Hump Day Motivation, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to cope with death. And this is a very close topic to my heart because, as people who watch my channel know, my grandma did recently pass away, and I'm still hurting about that. I'm still affected by that on a daily basis, and I don't know if that will ever change. I know there's definitely deaths in my past that I am still affected by today and probably will forever be affected by. And I do know that this is a little bit heavier of a topic, but I want to definitely say that if you haven't experienced death or it's not applicable to you at the moment, that it can really be applied to any situation, because while death is a very, very serious thing and it's very difficult to cope with, I know that there's a lot of things in life that are incredibly hard to cope with sometimes, and I think that what I talk about today can kind of help you cope with anything that may be going on in your life. So the first thing I want to say is something that I kind of needed to hear when I first got the news that my grandma had passed away. I'd actually just showed up to work, and one of my bosses said he was sorry about my grandma. And I was like, what happened to my grandma? And I didn't know at that point, obviously. Obviously, that meant that she had passed away. And I stepped outside to call my parents and figure out what was going on. My phone wasn't really working at that time. I had a different phone that only was able to work on Wi-Fi. And so obviously while I was driving to work, I wasn't able to get any calls or messages that my parents had sent me. And so the whole time when I was calling my parents and trying to figure out what was happening, I was trying to be very, very strong. From the moment that my boss said, sorry about your grandma, I went into this fight or flight mode where I chose fight, and I held it all in and tried my best to not seem like I was affected by it. And even when I got to the hospital and was trying to keep it all together, part of me just felt empty, and that wasn't good. I knew that it wasn't helping anything for me to try and stay strong in the situation, for me to pretend like it wasn't as big of a deal as it was. And I feel like if I had just broken down in the instant that I figured out what was happening, I may have been better off because of it. So my first word of advice for you is, if you're going through something, especially a death, don't hold anything back. Don't feel ashamed to react to a situation. Anytime you're coping with anything major like this in life, you have to be able to break down and cry or scream or whatever you feel like you may need to do. There's no emotion that is ever too extreme to react to any big situation. Anytime something major happens, you should never feel ashamed to let yourself feel it and react. That's my number one advice. Another thing I have to say is that you need to remember to breathe. At the same time, I didn't know what to do. Once I called my wife, I did break down crying. I mean, just telling her I love her, it's one of those things where you don't really think about that until the moment comes, and then you start thinking, when's the last time I told my grandma that I love her? And what was the last thing I said? So then you make sure that in that moment when I was saying I love you to my wife, I had to mean it and make sure that if anything were to happen, that I was happy with what was going on. But I did break down crying, and it made it hard to breathe. I think being able to take a step away from the situation would have been nice. I was very, very consumed by everything that was going on. It took me completely by shock, and I didn't really have time to think or to breathe. All I had time to do was step outside of my work, figure out what was going on, and then figure out how to get out of work, how to get to the hospital, figure out what the next step was, how I was going to get out of work to go to the funeral and everything. And with all this running through my head, there was little time to actually take a step back, take a seat, breathe, relax. I didn't actually get that closure until I was at the hospital, and probably not even until I was with my wife alone in the chapel, and we were able to just sit there and take a second to really let it all sink in and acknowledge that it was all real. And I think that's the biggest part about letting yourself have room to breathe in a traumatic situation and while you're coping with things, because being able to accept the situation is the only way that you can ever move forward. If you can't believe that what happened, then you're not going to be able to continue walking. You know, if you lose your legs and you still refuse to accept that you don't have legs, you're not going to be able to keep walking. You're just going to be stuck because you don't have legs. You can't keep walking physically. And until you accept that you lost your legs somehow, that would be pretty traumatic as well, you're not going to get a wheelchair, and you're not going to learn how to cope, how to continue with your life. Yes, you may not actually be walking, but you're going to continue with your forward momentum and moving on with your life the best that you possibly could in that situation. The third thing that I have to say is to remember the good times. This is more applicable to death specifically than with other coping things that you may be dealing with. But if somebody passes away, you really need to cherish everything that was great about them. Obviously, there's a reason why this death is so impactful to you and why it's going to change your life, because there was great things, there was memories supposedly with this person, and if you focus on the fact that they're gone, then you're going to be depressed, and it's going to be very, very hard to continue. Whereas if you can focus on the great times, I had a whole podcast talking about why I loved my grandma, the great stories that me and the co-host of the Bite Size Podcast, James, had to say about my grandma. I really think that that is an important step to anything. And even if it's not specifically remembering the good times with other coping mechanisms, maybe you just got a bad grade and you've only ever got straight A's and you got an F on your latest report card, and you need to cope with that. You need to remember the good times. I mean, yes, you got an F, but it's amazing that you've only gotten A's or that you've never gotten an F. And in the same way, it's awesome that I was able to have such great memories with my grandma. Hopefully that makes sense. I feel like there's always a bright side to things, and if you can think about that, even if it's not a bright side of this specific moment, if you can think about the bright side of the situation as a whole, then it will help you move on. I think the last thing that I have to say is to remember that no matter what you do, life does go on. I think that a lot of times you really get caught up in the moment and everything that's going on to the point where you don't think, I've lived 23 years before this. When this happened to me, I wasn't thinking, I've lived 23 years, I'm going to live a lot longer, and this is just a part of life. It's a fact of life. All I was thinking was crying and wanting to scream and wanting to run away from work and be with my family, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about how I'm going to move on from this, how I'm going to be okay, because life does go on no matter what you do. Time is one consistent factor of life that there's no real stop to while you're going through life. So I think it helps to realize that no matter how much this sucks, there is a tomorrow. Tomorrow will come, and tomorrow will hopefully not be quite as traumatic. Yes, my grandma died on that day. And yes, it broke me. It literally made me broken inside, and I didn't know how to make it to the next day. But the clock did know how to make it to the next day. And the clock has continued making it to the next day every day since that event happened. And I'm thankful for that, because I've been able to live each day forward. I've been able to spend time with my family. I've been able to spend time with my wife and tell people that I love them and hope that this situation doesn't happen to any of them, obviously, but if it did, then I still had those moments with them that become those great memories. And when that day does come, when I can take a step back and breathe and think about how life keeps going, and I can think about the great times that time continuing to move has allowed me to have, and I have accepted the situation, everything will be easier. Everything will be smoother into tomorrow. Hopefully this all made sense. Hopefully you guys like this. This was a little bit of a harder topic to talk about, and I know that some of it is definitely stuff that I wish I had a video to watch telling me this when I got that terrible news. And maybe you need to hear this right now. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, even if it's not necessarily the best time for you right now. I've been Zach. I love you guys, and I hope that you know that. And I hope that no matter what happens, you guys get through it, because I know that there is a tomorrow, and there's gonna be another video tomorrow. So hopefully you enjoy that too. I'm here for you. I'm Zach. Don't you do crack, because I love you, and I don't want to see anything happen to you. I don't want another thing to cope about. And I will catch you in the future.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm Zach. Don't you do crack. Hit like, subscribe, comment, all that other crap YouTubers say, and I will catch you in the future.